Great. I think we are just about at time here. So thank you, folks. Good afternoon. It's great to have you here. Thank you for joining us for our part 3 of our digital transformation series. Today we'll be talking about data. So excited to be joined here by Jordan, and we'll get things kicked off. Before we jump in, just wanted to do a quick housekeeping. It's going to be a 30-minute session, so more speedy than some webinars, but we will still love it to be interactive. So you'll see your questions section in your chat on the side. If you want to drop in questions at any point of this discussion, please do so, and we'll make sure to cover as many questions from the audience as we can. And also, don't feel like you have to rush through and do any kinds of screen captures along the way. It's mostly going to be an interactive, just talk and answer discussion, and we'll send this deck along after. So just as a quick intro for folks that haven't been on the prior sessions, my name's Liz Seville. I'm on our consulting team here at BrainCell and excited to dive into digital transformation with you all. I'm joined by Jordan Berry. Jordan, did you want to do a quick intro of yourself?
Yeah. Hey, it's great to have everybody here this afternoon. So, like mentioned, I'm kind of a data fanatic, so love all things data integration, data analytics. So excited to be here and discuss one of my favorite topics today. So.
And I'm just a data groupie. So just to kick things off again for folks that might not have been able to join some of our prior webinars or aren't familiar with BrainCell, we're a growth enablement company. We started as a value-added reseller about 3 decades ago and have branched into growth enablement that spans technology, process, and data, hence our conversation today. So topics from last session, and again, this link will be sent out after this call. But from last session, we talked about process. So one of the things that I love to nerd out about, and ultimately we're just discussing how process has a role within digital transformation, but then also what process entails, how process mapping works, and ultimately some common challenges and recommendations among process throughout digital transformations. And today, as mentioned, we're going to be focusing on data, which is another really integral part of making sure we set up companies for growth and scale. All right, as folks are settling in, would love to just open up a quick poll. So the first poll is, at what stage of digital transformation is your company currently in? So if you could please select one of the following, which you're thinking about but maybe haven't started anything, just starting but don't really have a full plan in place, have a plan in place and are executing against that plan, completed and or almost completed, or not something you're prioritizing at the moment. So if you could all just answer on this, that'd be great. All right, let's see results. Okay, wow, great. So it seems like we're surrounded by some folks that are just starting but don't yet have a plan. So this is the perfect webinar for you all to be joining, and we're excited to help you create that plan. All right, and the last poll question would be, what data pain points are you currently experiencing? And for this one, feel free to select all of the ones that apply to you. So we're familiar with this from working on in data, I'm sure, Jordan, but super spreadsheets that are hard to maintain, outdated dashboards or outdated reporting, reports with numbers that don't match, or lack of confidence or trust in your data, or maybe you're just not feeling pain at all, which is great, and please tell us your ways. Right. All right. So it seems like a pretty big divide across the board. A lot of people feeling all of the things. Okay, great. So we're going to open up for some Q&A discussion. As mentioned, for all of you in the audience, please feel free to drop your questions into the chat and we'll get to those as soon as possible. But I will turn it over to you, Jordan, for the first question, which is, how has the role of data evolved in digital transformation?
Awesome. Yeah, no, great question. I know this is, a part of the overall series. So just want to talk about data transformation in general. A lot of people think of data as this kind of nebulous thing that, maybe it's a spreadsheet, maybe it's a database. One of the things I want to talk about is just kind of the growth of data. And because data has grown, it is obviously now more impactful in a lot of things we're doing. So, when you think about when databases were created, a couple decades ago, you were really managing hundreds, thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of rows. Now it's not uncommon for organizations to have terabytes of data that they've collected and are harnessing. And so it's really, when you can think about data, it's both operational, how are we doing things day to day, but then also how can we start to use that as an asset in different ways. So those are a couple of things. And one area I want to talk about too with digital transformation is a lot of people think about it kind of in two ways. And this kind of simple framework is efficiency and effectiveness. And so I think a lot of people tend to gravitate towards that efficiency side of things. So, as I'm digitally transforming, I'm going away from these manual processes, things that aren't trackable. Maybe I'm investing in different tools for the different departments in my organization. Maybe I'm adopting cloud. I'm doing all these things to make us more productive day to day. And while that's super important, and we'll touch on that a lot, I think the other side of the coin, the effectiveness side, is where a lot of people don't really keep that in mind as they're digitally transforming. So how do you understand your customer better? How do you anticipate their needs? How do you get to know their preferences, their likes, their dislikes? How do you look for signals on when to reach out to them and lend a helping hand? These are the types of things that really not only creates a customer, but keeps a customer for life. And so I want to just kind of keep that as mind as we're going through our questions today.
Love that. So really customer-centric data and how to use your data in a customer-centric way. That's great. And what types of data should organizations be prioritizing in a digital transformation?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think, with any process like this, especially digital transformation, which can encompass so much, it's really about those stair steps of maturity. So I'd like to think about, if you're just starting out, you've probably got a lot of emails, maybe some ad hoc spreadsheets. Really, the first thing you should be thinking about is how do we track each of our different functions? And so a lot of times that is those operational tools. So it's investing in tools like CRM, ERP, marketing, back office, those types of things. So really focusing on that operational data, until you've got each of these various functions understood, you're collecting the data, you're making sure that it's up to date. It's going to be really hard to do those higher echelon type things. So that's where I would start first, is make sure that you've got all those bases covered. You've either got tools in place that are helping you track that, or you've got processes that help you track that as well. And I would also make sure that you're, tracking that in a way that the data is consumable. I know it sounds kind of crazy, but some systems are much easier to get data out of than others. And so if you don't put that kind of mindset in place early, where not only does the system need to help me with my process, but it needs to be easily accessible. We need to be able to extract that data. So that would be the first kind of rung that I would call it that you want to get to, is just tracking that operational data. From there, you can start to do a little bit more advanced type data collection. So things like images or sentiment or signals, and some of that data may come from your internal systems, but some of it may come from external systems.
Mm.
Think about kind of review boards. People are leaving comments on your tool or your solution. What's the sentiment? How are they feeling? Maybe more of an internal tool might be your customer support and ticketing system. A lot of really good, rich data there. I kind of always go back to the notes or the comment field in CRM, where people just dump a lot of ad hoc text. There's a lot of gold in that data, but you may not be thinking about that as an asset for your organization.
It's a
And then
really good
finally,
point.
yeah, there's a lot of, it's crazy when you feel like the ending to look through those comments and kind of see how much customer insight you can get from those. And then the final piece I would say is kind of all the information that could help with predictive or AI. So think about, images or audio or video, recordings of Zoom, taking the transcription from all those videos and using that text, things that traditionally used to be very hard to do. Even documents, especially in the legal space. If you've got documents, optical character recognition was big in the 90s, but it was super expensive. Now with some of these AI tools, you can do this super inexpensively. And now all of a sudden, all this untapped data that was too hard to, acquire and unify is now kind of fair game to help you with whatever your strategy is.
Yeah, those are great points. I think it goes back to the first question on how it's evolved. It's really more than just spreadsheets at this point and how you can collect your data. It's great. So it seems like everyone in the audience answered that there's a little bit of a lack of trust in data right now, or in data in their organization. So on that front, how can companies ensure that they have high quality and high data integrity within their organizations?
Yeah, that's kind of the ever pervasive challenge of data, right? Is okay, we want to collect it, we want to hoard it, we want to create as much of it as we can. But if it's a mess, it's just as painful as if we didn't have it. And so I really kind of think of it in two ways: is both there's the technology side and then there's the human side.
Hmm.
So from a technology side, you really need to make sure that your processes, and I know this was touched on in the previous webinar, make sure your processes and those key things that you want to track are understood and really baked into the tooling. I find that a lot of times people will, adopt a tool, they'll take the out of the box fields, but those don't necessarily apply to their business and how they
Right.
operate. And so by enabling those processes and now tracking that data, you can align your data to a strategy. So I think a lot of it's kind of that pre-planning, making sure that you're enabling, when you collect data, that you're collecting it in a way that you can then later analyze it and use it. So I think that's probably a big part of it, and that's on the technology side. More on the human side is okay, and usually this is a person, kind of the data czar, or someone that's overseeing those systems, making sure that the data not only exists but is accurate. I always go back to kind of CRM data, garbage in, garbage out. It's only as good as
Right.
what is put in there. So, it sounds old school, but the kind of the consistent, maybe weekly meeting where you're looking at the data and making sure it's up to date, that type of thing can be very helpful. And then more in aggregate, you want to look at your data real estate and say, okay, we may have copies of data in different places. What's the
Hmm.
source of truth? Which one, wins over others? So kind of having that data game plan of, what data is more important than others, that all plays into later on when you want to do analysis and AI. You're able to, use those types of tools.
That's a great point. And I think that you started to touch on this, but would love to hear a little bit more about your thoughts on how do you put good data governance in place?
Yeah, it's interesting. With data governance, I really kind of think about it in a couple ways. So one is the data available? So if you're trying to, I really like to think about asking questions. So imagine, you're leading the organization, you want an answer to a question. Do you even have the data to answer that question? So that's always kind of step number one with data governance is, do you have the coverage that you need?
Hmm.
And then really starting to think about, okay, if we have that coverage, is the data in the format or stored in a way that we can actually use it? If you want to look at year over year, do you have data that can support a year over year type, question? And so a lot of times that means not only just having an operational tool, but are you taking snapshots of that data over time so you can do those types of trending, that type
Right.
of thing. And then finally, can that data be trusted? And so I think that's kind of an always on, you're going through every quarter, you're looking at the data, you're verifying it, you're making sure that it's up to date. Um, a lot of times are more recently, people are talking about kind of data contracts and the idea of, okay, what is the contract for the data? You expect a date to be a date field, a number to be a number. You're basically setting up these expectations around what the data should look like so that when you have those questions and you need them answered quickly, again, you've got that asset not only available, but ready to use. And so those are kind of the types of things that I would be thinking about from a governance standpoint.
That makes sense. And I feel like this is a great conversation about the intersections with digital transformation. It's not just the technology, it's not just the data, it's not just the process, but really how they all play together.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Which brings us to our next question, which is on
Mm-hmm.
tools. So, which tools do you recommend for effective data use and management?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think when people think about data and they think about tooling, the first place they go, and it's a very natural thought, is data integration. So I've invested in a CRM tool, I've invested in ERP. I want them to talk together. Let me integrate the two together. And
Mhm.
I think that's a great first step. The challenge becomes when you add a third system, and now you add a fourth system and a fifth system. And so you want them all to integrate, all talk together. But if you kind of envision that, diagram, we often call it kind of spaghetti integration. So you've got all these tools talking to each other. They're all pushing and pulling data. You go look at one system, you see one number. You go look at another system, you see another number. And if you really weren't involved in helping build the spaghetti integration, it's hard to understand, what are the cadences? When does this data update? What should I expect of my data? And so I think that's kind of the first piece of this is that becomes really challenging. And so there's really been this new class of tools that have come out really in the last decade. It's often referred to as a modern data platform. And so it's kind of an interesting word because it's not really a platform. It's really more of a toolkit, I would call it. So a lot of people think of a modern data platform, they'll hear terms like Snowflake or Databricks or Dremio or some of these tools that more the enterprise class organizations have adopted. But that's usually only one piece of the puzzle.
Mm,
If you think about data, you've really got to do a couple things. You've got to extract the data. So let's say it lives in these systems, they are siloed, so they're, in each system, but it's really hard to look at that data unified and in aggregate. So you've got to get that data out. That's step number one. So usually there's a whole class of tools there on how do you get the data out. Then step number two is you got to put it somewhere. Okay, I want to store that data. And again, if it's small, that's not a big deal. But as soon as you start to get in that larger realm, and again, not huge, thinking thousands of rows of data, hundreds of thousands of rows of data, which is not uncommon for small organizations these days. You need to put that somewhere that's really effective. And so that's where really cost effective. And that's where things like cloud storage come in. So you
right.
can put that data there, you can store it really cheaply. But once you have that data stored, okay, I want to do some analysis or I want to model that data. Again, enter tool number three. How do you take the data from a raw state into a modeled and ready to go state? Maybe I need to join data across systems. I've never met a data set that wasn't dirty to begin with, so you've got to clean it up, you got to get it ready to go. And so that, there's that tool that really helps you model the data. And then great, you've got your data modeled, you can look at it, you can query it, but now you got to put it somewhere so someone can use it. So if you want to now push that data back into your CRM tool, or you want to use it for analytics, or you want to build a machine learning model on top of it, now you're looking at tool 5, 6, 7, 8. So not to belabor the point, but it's thinking about, okay, I've got to pull together 10 different tools to create the solution. And what's nice is there's some tools that are starting to now do kind of an all-in-one approach. So you can buy one tool, you can handle each of those processes. Because let's face it, the people care about the outcomes. All this data
Right.
ingestion, modeling, while it's necessary, it doesn't provide that innate business value. What does provide value is getting answers to questions, being able to see that data in real time, especially visually through things like dashboards. It's being able to show that data to customer support reps or salespeople so they can have a better interaction with the customer. And then kind of on the new age is, okay, and I want to predict and anticipate, how do I build models to support a more forward-looking organization? So all that to be said, I think the modern data platform is here to stay. I think it's a big leap forward in terms of data management and data growth. But it's a fairly complex challenge. So I think you've got to really understand the piece parts as well as what does a whole solution look like for you.
That's a great point. And
Mhm.
I know you've touched on this within your answer, but we do have some leaders in the audience that I'm sure are curious about, okay, now how do I translate this data into those actionable insights that you were mentioning? Do you have any recommendations or thoughts on that?
Absolutely, yeah. I think really what I would say is start with the end in mind. I know I just went through kind of a 10-step process that could be maybe intimidating, but if you start at step 11, which is using your data, that lets you kind of reverse engineer what you need to do ahead of time. So a lot of times what I think, and it literally goes back to, you could draw your perfect dashboard. What would it look like? And a lot of times when you start to build out those KPI cards or those visuals, that data comes from a couple systems. Especially organizations that have gone the more best of breed approach, which I would say most have, where you've got some tools from vendor A, some tools from vendor B. It might come from multiple sources. And so if you look at the end result of this is what I want, then you can kind of go backwards and figure out, well, we only need a subset of our full data landscape to support
Hmm.
this. And so once you kind of prove the model with that first use case, then you can kind of let it snowball. And more from a change management and an adoption standpoint too, is if you can really quickly get that win, show the value, it will then expand and grow from there. So don't feel like you have to tackle the whole thing all at once. You can really step into this from the beginning.
That's a great question and brings up something that we run into with clients sometimes, which is their goal if they're starting to put a data infrastructure in place, they want to think about the future and future proof it. So maybe that means that there's a lot more fields. So what do you recommend in terms of walking the walk and balancing that between having too many fields versus setting yourself up for your future data?
Yeah, I think that's a good balance. Kind of traditionally, and this is getting a little bit into the data engineering lingo, you would hear the term ETL. So I want to extract my data, transform it, and then load it. And that was always very use case specific. I only want to pull certain fields because that's what we need at the end. The
Hmm.
challenge now for fast moving, agile organizations is you may not know what you need 6 months from now. You have a use case today, but 6 months from now, you may have a different use case, or maybe the market changes. We're seeing
Right.
different economic conditions. So you need to have different answers to different questions. And so if you don't put that foundation in place up front, and again, the costs have come down dramatically. So it's much cheaper to extract everything than it is to have to select ahead of time. And the value of that is if you do that up front, now you have, the full kit of solutions that you can, or, you have all the options in terms of what questions you can ask and that type of thing. So it may seem like overkill up front. Let's say it's 150 fields, you only need 10. My recommendation would be to extract all of them so that down the road you can then use them however you need to.
Great recommendation.
Mhm.
So what does or doesn't a data-driven company look like? What are symptoms of a company that might not be set up to be data-driven?
I always love this question, and we've talked about it a lot. Is those symptoms of data, and I love hearing the poll answers. It's not just one symptom, right? You often see quite a few, and so I think it is back to a couple of those things that we already discussed. But it's spreadsheet madness is kind of what we call it. So a lot of times people will replace operational systems with kind of a super spreadsheet. So I think that's
Mhm.
one system, and spreadsheets aren't bad as kind of places to workshop and to ideate and that type of thing. But if a spreadsheet is now becoming an operational tool for your organization, where multiple people are looking at it and using it on a day-to-day basis, that's a red flag for us for sure. Is that could be replaced with some sort of either operational tool or data-driven initiative. Another symptom I see is kind of we each get different answers to the same question. So someone from this department is looking at it and they see one number. Someone from this department is looking at it, they see another number. The customer is maybe looking at a portal and they see a different number. So now all of a sudden you have this, kind of whirlwind of confusion. That's another symptom of not being data driven. And then the other side is a lot of times when you're not data driven, you have a lot of approval processes. This is kind of
Mhm.
one people don't think about is if you're not empowering your people with data and that self-serve data capability, they're often having to go through approvals because there's probably a couple key people that either know the data or understand what's right or wrong, and so hey, can I give this customer a discount? Okay, that has to go through the approval process because someone has to look at the numbers and make a decision. But if you empower that salesperson with, hey, here's our range, here's our variability, what we've seen with customers like this in the past looks like this, you can now enable them so they're able to confidently give that information to the customer, live time rather than having to go back and increase the cycles. So again, just kind of something people don't really think about, but those kind of gates and approval processes are oftentimes a symptom of a non-data driven organization. And I would say finally is if you're having to kind of manually pull data together on a consistent basis, whether that's board meetings or you're kind of all hands, and you're now dumping data from a system, you're putting in a spreadsheet, you're doing pivot tables, you're now copying those
Right.
pivot tables, maybe screenshotting them, putting them in a deck. Again, not bad in a single moment, but if you're doing that over and over again, usually that's a sign of, hey, this is data that we need to run our business. We should automate this so that we can focus on the more strategic side of things rather than that data collection, data munging, data
Mhm.
prep that is candidly painful for a lot of folks too, because if you can use that data to enact a strategy, that's much more impactful than spending hours and hours working with the actual raw data.
That's a great point.
Hopefully
And
that paints a picture of a little bit of a and I'm sure a lot of organizations see those symptoms in different areas, and um, you know that's why we're here to help relieve some of those symptoms, kind of the data doctor approach. So
I think that that's a great point. And you actually touched on my next question, which is how do companies foster a data-driven culture? And you started talking about empowering people with access to the data and enabling them to understand the data. Anything else that you would recommend in terms of structuring a data-driven culture?
yeah, I would definitely say that when you're thinking about data-driven culture, it's empowerment, it's self-service. The other thing people don't think about a whole lot is, okay, what data to use. As your data estate gets bigger and bigger, there's a
Mhm.
whole class of tools called kind of data catalogs where if we've got all these different data sets, what are the ones that we want to use for certain purposes. So we'll often
Right.
see a lot of energy and focus on defining what is this data, what is it used for, what's it good for. And then in terms of empowering that culture, I think some people think about data driven being almost robotic, where you don't need that
Mhm.
human and it's just that the data will tell us the answer and we'll just follow the data. But there is still so much nuance. I think it's more of a scientific mindset, right? So if you're able to get people to think about, okay, what's my hypothesis? What can I try? And then what can I use the data to validate whether that worked or not? And then you doing that over and over again, so you're kind of trying to create this fast fail culture as well, along with the data.
Mhm.
And so, hey, let's figure out what doesn't work just as quickly as we figure out what works, and then that'll point us in the right direction. So I think the more you can create that culture of failure isn't bad as long as we have the data to back it up. Now we know where not to go just as much as we know where to go. So a lot of it comes down to people management, kind of your core cultural components. Do you value this versus do you value, other things? So it's just as human as it is, technology and data.
Yeah, I think that that's a really good point on the fear of data being too robotic. But I think that it's also about enabling folks to spend their time where it matters. And sometimes spending a lot of time in spreadsheets might not be the best use of time. So being able to give them back that time is probably really valuable as well. I'll just shout out to the audience that we're wrapping up this portion. So if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat. I know we have a few more minutes left, so happy to address any of your questions. And then one additional question for you, Jordan, would be, could you share a success story of a company that's excelling with being data-driven?
Yeah, there's a couple come to mind. One that I've seen that was really impactful, and it goes back to some of those things we talked about earlier: market conditions, having a lot of data collected but maybe not using it the best. We had a manufacturing client who was interesting. They were in a very niche market area, but they had a global sales team. So their sales team was selling this particular product across Europe, across North America. And so one of the challenges they had was, again, that empowerment of people with data. If their sales reps wanted reporting and information, often that would be sent out via email with a PDF report, and it was only sent weekly, monthly, that type of thing, depending on what report they were looking at. And on top of that, the executives and the leadership team weren't able to make decisions to, hey, do we help provide more resources to this region, or do we focus on certain reps who are maybe struggling and that type of thing. It was really hard to see that at live time. And so they'd get to the end of the quarter, get to the end of the year, and it was always kind of a rear view mirror approach. And so what they did is they implemented a modern data platform. They'd already invested in tools like HubSpot for their marketing. They had a CRM tool. They had an ERP tool that they were using extensively, especially in the manufacturing space, focusing on inventory and delivery and that type of thing. And so by basically pooling all that data and then building their models on top of that, they got a couple of things. One, they had more lifetime dashboards. So we did what we call our fast dash process. We helped them design and build a dashboard, quite quickly in a matter of weeks. That has now become the replacement for those reports. So their sales reps, no matter what time zone they're in or which country they're in, they can log in, they can see their own metrics as well as the team metrics, in real time. So that was a huge impact and saved a ton of administrative hours on building those reports and sending them out. They added snapshotting, so now they can do trending and overtime analysis. So if they want to look at, are we trending up, are we trending down? How about our inventory levels? What about our delivery times? They can start to see all these things, month over month, week over week. And then finally, just from a cultural standpoint, they're now asking questions in a more sophisticated way. Because they're not so worried about the basics, they can focus more on those strategic items. So should we add this product line? Should we focus on this class of customer? When these types of situations arise, what have we done in the past? All of those answers are more accessible. And so they're focused on being a more, concierge sale type organization. They're focusing more on the customer. So again, it took, about a couple months to get this really up and running, adopted, that type of thing. But now they're a wholly different organization than they were just 6 months ago.
Wow, super impactful. Thanks for sharing. I think we might have time for one quick audience member question, which is, for someone new to the world of digital transformation and data analytics, where would you recommend starting?
Ooh, okay. Yeah, that is a good question. It is tough because when you're looking at your organization, you're looking at, maybe you're reading all these headlines online. It feels like there's so many ways you can go. I think for me, it would be kind of like I said, starting with the end in mind. What are those questions that you're trying to answer? And it doesn't have to be a lot. Maybe it's 3, maybe it's 5 questions that you're trying to answer, and kind of reverse engineering that. One of the principles we talk about is it's okay to do it manually once to kind of prove it out, but then make sure you can automate it after that. So I think that's how I would start, is end in mind. What are the questions you're trying to ask? What are the answers you need? And then what is the data that supports those? And if you can understand those things and the processes that support them, that you now have kind of the unlock to be able to jump in and start your data process for digital transformation.
Great, thank you. Awesome recommendation. Well, thank you so much for your time, Jordan. And thank you all for joining this call. That was a quick 30 minutes. As a reminder, we do have an additional series or additional session for this series on digital transformation. So there's going to be another session next week. So feel free to sign up. This deck will be distributed after with the links to sign up if you haven't done so already. But thanks again, Jordan. It was great to have a discussion here, and appreciate you, Sarah, in the background doing our producing.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was a great session.